So today we're going to go over kind of a high-level look at what the history of beer looks like. I know when I first started brewing, I was kind of like, well, how did this all start? Where did it all come from? How did it evolve over time? And I did some research over time, and of course I keep following any new developments and things. And anytime I see history of beers, something, I get intrigued and want to see more, of course. So it kind of started when I first did the research, it started with ancient Sumeria and the Egyptians. So Sumeria was modern day Iraq and Mesopotamia which means between two rivers. Those two locations are said to be the first locations based on findings and stuff like that was found by stuff they in architectural digs and stuff like that. But how they found out that they can make beer was they took the grains that were soaking just to make bread or something like that, then that were out left in the air, and wild yeast had found the grains and converted it to beer or an alcoholic beverage. They figured out this liquid that was there was like, oh, this is tasty and it makes me feel good. So it's kind of how that all started, and then it kind of evolved. And they figured out they can actually do this on purpose. They figured it happened on accident at first, and then they actually figured out how to replicate the process. However, they still didn't know it was yeast that was making this happen, that came in through the air from it just blows around is what it is. If you look at like a grape that was grown, there's that white film sort of thing. Part of that is yeast, and there's wild yeast that's in the air. Every region in the world has it, and that's what happened to that grain soaking. It just basically spontaneously created alcohol on accident, which is a great invention of accident. So after that evolved into they actually had brewing gods that would pray to, basically, and that was the way to give thanks for the beer. Yeah, they actually drink out of straws too in the Egypt side. This is kind of strange, but it's probably thicker, I imagine. They're not totally sure. Then you fast forward to, I think it was 2015 or 2016. They found older evidence of rice beer being made in what is now ancient China, and that they figured out that was older than the Sumerians and the Egyptians, which they never met, by the way. They just figured out around the same time that they had figured out what beer was and how to make it. But ancient China with the rice beer ended up being older at some point. Then just after 2018 or 2019, I saw an article that said ancient now Israel is even the first one, based on carbon dating. The years are all messed up with that, so they're not really sure exactly, but they say that based on their research, it's actually the oldest version of the cereal liquid of beer, which is, maybe we should go over that real quick. So beer is defined as barley today with hops and yeast, but basically a cereal grain liquid, and it's any sort of wheat, barley, and stuff like that. Which is once you malt it, it just becomes malt at that point. So let's go. So that's the first evidence of beer. It evolved from there, and then some religions kind of messed that up in certain areas where they no longer evolved in the beer culture in the Middle East area. But then we kind of go over to ancient Europe, where the monks were the first real commercial brewers, is the credit to that. And what they were doing is they were funding charities and the church to feed, the needy and stuff like that. And that was all funded from artisanal type projects they did, bread, cheese, but then of course beer. If you're a fan of like Trappist ales and stuff like that, a lot of those recipes really didn't start until more the 1800s. This is more a few hundred years earlier. In the 1500s, we started with the Germans created the beer purity law, the Reinheitsgebot. This was a way for them to make sure that beer only had certain things in it. And that at the time, they also didn't know what yeast was still until then, until the 1800s. But at that time, in the 1500s, they did not know what yeast was. And all beer could only have malt and hops and water. That's it. The yeast, again, was spontaneously ferment out in an open container as opposed to closed ones in most cases now today in modern brewing. And they did update it once they figured out what yeast was, and they did update that eventually. But then I believe that has actually gone away since craft beer has become such a big thing up into recent years. Now with that is kind of how all these styles evolve too. Every region has their own wild yeast in the air based on anything that they can, anything that was a style that comes from a certain area was all built from I guess, the yeast privy to just that area. So a lot of these yeast that are come from, especially like the German and the Belgium type areas, were only specific to that area, and then they didn't know what was going on with this magical fermentation. Basically, they just knew it would happen in a couple of days. Well, then they figured out what it was. They figured out how to harvest it, and then it would grow from there. That's kind of the basic, real quick, high level history there. But then I want to turn to the American brewing history and beer history. Where that started and almost died for lack of better words and stuff. After the Revolutionary War, they saw a lot of these ales as too British. We don't want to be British anymore. We're American. Get rid of it. So it's still there, yeah, and there's still a lot of home brewing going on. Washington has his own recipes out there, and if you just Google those, it's pretty cool. But they went to whiskey for a long time, and that was the American way, and whiskey got big, of course. But then it wasn't until the 1800s when the German immigrants started coming over, and they brought over a lager yeast, and this was a crisper finished ale or beer, and it's not ale. It's fermented differently. But this took off really big, and a lot of your northern states like Pennsylvania and the mountains, they can find a cave. Wisconsin, Minnesota, they have all the lakes and stuff like that, and have access to ice that was harvested, by the way. This is right before refrigeration. The lagers were real big over there, and these businesses blew up. I mean, Anheuser and Busch and everything like that. These businesses took off really quick, grew really quick, and became pretty dominant in the industry. And America got more into beer again. It really switched things, Then, of course, there's the Temperance Movement that has been happening for a long time in the early 1900s and late 1800s. But then it really got traction during the 1910s range for World War I. Because all those German immigrants were the ones that owned these breweries and pubs and stuff like that. They said, oh, look, it's the Germans who were fighting in World War I that own these things. And it got more traction, actually. Probably wasn't the main reason. Maybe it was part of it. But it was, we can't fund these people anymore. And all of a sudden, Prohibition starts. We'll go into all that, but that's a whole other way that, there's a lot of things that came out of Prohibition that changed. It hurt a lot of brewers, of course. A lot of brewers went under. Some made it by actually switched to ice cream and dairy sort of products. But some still went under. And a lot of these bigger brewers that were still there, I don't know what they're doing exactly either, but they were buying these other smaller brewers out and taking their equipment basically. And eventually, when Prohibition ended, lagers were like pretty much the biggest ones out there. There was like a one porter out there, maybe barely, but it was mostly lagers. Well, it wasn't until 1979 when two things happened that around that time. One in that year was homebrewing became legal again, and then Sierra Nevada started. Sierra Nevada was obviously a big pioneer with this IPA, hop forward pale ale, and didn't take off for a long time, but it was gaining traction. It took a while, but it was gaining traction. They did grow nicely early on, but it was still, you know, a lot of hard education to sell their beer, but it was growing. And after that, in the early 80s or so, there was also Sam Adams and Bell's both starting as well. Now, these guys they're all doing stuff that was not normal at the time, really different beers, but it was gaining traction and creating beer niche communities that started to grow, of course. But really, in that 1979, when homebrewing became legal again, was when craft beer really was kind of born. Because what happened was created a whole homebrew market. People started to brew their beer more, and they said, "What would happen if I make this a brewery? Maybe take this professional and grow from there?" That's kind of where that all sparked, and that it didn't really take a wildfire until after the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, and people that were losing their jobs doubled down and created a brewery instead. And then a lot of those brewers that started in the early 2000s or the 90s got even bigger because they already had the foothold in the traffic and they already had kind of figured out the business. And that's where like founders and stuff like that came from, where they really started to grow after the craft beer movement really got bigger in the late 2008, 9, 10 range. That's all I got today for what the beer history of America looks like. I wanted to be more of a quick high level of that whole range. I'd be curious to know which one you would want more an in-depth look at. Let me know, and make sure you like or comment and subscribe so I know I can do better. Thanks.